So I grew up in southern New Hampshire and was a ski racer in New Hampshire. And so in my childhood, I'm 67 years old. So I lived through an era when much of farming was organic in my early childhood, and most of our food came from spitting distance. Our holiday hams and turkeys and our lambs and chicken and eggs were all from farms that we tended to know. And of course, all of that disappeared in my lifetime, in my childhood. And I mentioned the ski racing because I spent a lot of time in the mountains and literally watched climate change taking effect in countless ways, and just generally our relationship to the planet having an impact. We used to be able to see the Atlantic Ocean every day from the top of Mount Washington, and that disappeared during my lifetime. So all of that led me to, when I went off to college, to focus on environmental efforts on climate change. And all of that led me to organic, because it was obvious that, I could study the problems all day long, but what I wanted to do was work on the solutions. I went to work at as an intern at a little place called New Alchemy Institute, which was on Cape Cod, which is one of the really early organic research and education places focused on organic aquaculture and agriculture. And ultimately I became the executive director of the Institute. And of course, NOFA, Samuel founded NOFA right smack in the middle of that period. So we were deep in the research side, which inevitably meant that we were very focused on policy, or the absence of policy, the absence of common definition of organic standards. And so this was all the kind of early invention period. There was no organic sector or industry. And so when Samuel started had the first NOFA conferences, I would organize a contingent from New Alchemy to come up. And whether they were mostly at UNH in those days, we bounced around. It was a kind of a ragtag band, mixture of scientists, activists, farmers. The conferences were really basically what NOFA was in those days. Yes, we had newsletters and we did some seed exchanges and that kind of thing. But at the very, 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 very beginning, NOFA was an annual opportunity, or semi-annual, because we started to have winter conferences, and this is even before there were state chapters. It was an opportunity to come together for inspiration, and to better ourselves, to challenge ourselves, to improve on the definitions of what organic meant, to draw on experiences like the Soil Association in the UK and others, to bring in people like Bill Mollison from Tasmania, and hang out, but really drive deeply into the tough questions of how we were going to build something durable, resilient, and economic, at least from my perspective. I think there were probably farmers who were there to advance, their understanding of pest control for, cutworms. And my wife, who was the founder of New Jersey NOFA, she came to learn about lettuce varieties from Sam Smith. So everyone brought their own particular agenda, but for me it was really about building a lasting infrastructure, so to enable organic to become a vital part of 21st century American economy and agriculture. Sure. Well, the first involvement was Samuel came in with Samuel, you need to know, of course, I'm biased. He's my partner and lifelong friend at this point, and obviously the creator of Stonyfield, where I've spent my adult life. So I owe him a great deal. But I will just say he literally willed this organization into being. Most of us were impoverished. I mean, I was earning $13,000 a year as the director of New Alchemy Institute. I didn't have any spare change. I was living out of the organic gardens and out of our fish. And most everybody, the farmers were, not exactly earning take-home pay. So, and, Samuel would, I mean, you really do need to talk to Louise Kamen to really understand. I mean, Samuel in the dead of winter would just go out and give lectures at UNH or places, leaving, 6 kids at home with an unheated barn in New Ipswich, New Hampshire, just rallying people to this cause of, hey, look, come on, we're poisoning ourselves. We're heating the planet up. Where conventional agriculture is failing farmers. Family farmers are an endangered species. Let's do something. And of course, he came to me, and he came to us at New Alchemy and said, you need to be part of this. So there was no saying no to him. That was not an option. If you shared the passion, as most of us did, you showed up. So that's really how that happened. Over the years, as I said before, although my background is in climate change, I wound up focusing on wind energy. So I would actually teach water pumping windmill workshops at NOFA conferences. And I was also very active in China, helping to explore this is in the late 70s, early 80s, helping to explore ways to help the 1.2 billion Chinese living on 2/3 of the agricultural land that we have, to adopt more organic methods. And I would lead tours and bring various NOFA and other friends from all over the world, actually, but mainly here in the Northeast, on trips to China. And so I would come back, report in at the annual NOFA conferences, and share these 2 workshop back-to-back slideshows on China. When I decided to leave New Alchemy, it was really, it's a poignant moment. This was 1983. Ronald Reagan had become president in 81. And despite all of our work in the early days of NOFA and, Oregon Tilth and the other affiliate groups around the country, to advance the whole idea of organic standards, the Reagan administration just came in and absolutely slashed all funding for education, organic farming, climate, anything to do with climate, renewable energy. And so our little nonprofit, Samuel was running something called the Rural Education Center in Wilton, out of which he was also running NOFA. And of course, Grace Gershuni, who was the director for many years, was his assistant director. So it was a bit of a mishmash between NOFA and the center. And I was a trustee of the center. When the Reagan budget cuts had very catalytic effects, very destructive effects in terms of stopping really important research and education and advocacy work, but also had a very powerful, when people look at sort of, conventional politics and they see, the challenges to organics on the parts of chemical companies, I have to say that the whiplash, the positive whiplash that resulted from the budget cuts, was that most of us nonprofits, the Coolidge Center for the Advancement of Agriculture and Boston Urban Gardeners, we got our acts together because we could no longer depend on federal support, and most of the private foundations had to go in and rescue people with real need, hunger and childcare and medical needs. And so, organic, which was a sort of more, it was dire and urgent, but for the charitable philanthropy side, it was more of a discretionary grants source. We in the organic space really had to get our act together and walk the talk. And that's out of that moment, that's how Stonyfield was born. Because Samuel was running these workshops. He had about a $100,000 a year budget. I had about $1 million a year budget. And we had to come up with means of self-support. And literally one day, sitting around a a board meeting, we said, Samuel was making yogurt from his one cow. We said, let's start selling this stuff. And I could list 100 little organic enterprises that got their start back then. Peter and Bunny Flint with the organic cow in Vermont, and Tom's of Maine, and others who had these organic values. We really had to commercialize them. And again, NOFA became this rallying point, this place where we could compare notes. I remember when the first distributors of organic produce showed up at NOFA, it was, there was a lot of anti-capitalist sentiment. This was sort of a 60s generation thing. There was a lot of nervousness about money. And yet for many of us, it was clear that if we didn't build economic self-reliance, then we didn't have anything. We just have a bunch of words. And so, my involvement over the years has been more following that thread of enabling and helping and supporting and promoting both the business planning, the marketing, the kind of commercialization, helping all with the focus of not just growing organic, but having a viable path for family farmers, which to me, NOFA might as well have been called, in those days it was the Natural Organic Farming Association, might as well be called the Natural Organic Farming, Family Farming Organization, because that to me, it was always and still is. And if I'm proud of if there's one thing that stands above all else with our growth of Stonyfield, which is now obviously a $500 million company, it's the fact that we support over 2,000 family farmers, and our family farmers make money, and most of them are former conventional, and they couldn't. And these guys are who helped us to grow, and so many others. So that's where my track has been. But of course, what I'm also very proud of when it comes to NOFA is that Stonyfield went from being a child of NOFA to becoming a funder of NOFA. And I'm very proud of the, hundreds of thousands of dollars over the years of, even when we were not making money, we were funding the natural farmer. I think we had the back page ad for, 20 years, because I just felt we owed so much to NOFA, and that it really needed to be. And as I said to you before we started recording, for me, the most exciting part of NOFA has been to enable the next gen, to take the torch and run with it. My life was reshaped by NOFA. Literally, I met my wife at the conference at Franklin Pierce when I was the keynote speaker, and now I'm supposed to know the year, right? 1984, and Meg was starting New Jersey NOFA, and our entire family owes our existence to NOFA. But I'm especially motivated to help the next gen farmers, activists, policy people, business people, as I like to say, make their own mistakes. They don't have to make mine. But I was often at the organizing meetings for new chapters, or the first, committee meetings for standards, or, I would get off the farm, our farm where Stonyfield was being incubated, because again, that's what you undid in the winters. You helped get these things going. And, as you are well aware, NOFA has always had some financial insecurity. So, raising money, helping the natural farmer, advocating with OTA. And, actually, speaking of that, the Organic Trade Association really got its roots at NOFA, because its predecessor was something called AFPANA, the Organic Food Production, I forget what the rest of the acronym was. Anyways, that was a bunch of NOFA people, along with others from around the country, and started in Brattleboro, and that today is now the trade organization that is most responsible for any advances that we're having with federal or organic standard protection and policy. So again, NOFA can take credit for that. Yeah, so Samuel and Louisa created Stonyfield out of the Rural Education Center in 1983. The Rural Education Center was started in 79. As I said, I was a trustee. I joined them a few months after the founding. And we set about divvying up roles and responsibilities to grow it, to get it through its dark days. Then Samuel retired in around 2000 or 2001. And I continued on leading for another 12 years as the CEO and chairman. Well, actually, as the CEO. And then in 2012, I retired as CEO and became chair. Of course, we had sold the company to Danone in 2001, but I continued to run it very independently for another 12 years. And then today, we set out at Danone I started a bunch of organic companies for Danone globally, including their fastest growing brand in France, a little organic brand called Lait de Vache. But we then set out to buy White Wave, which owns Horizon and Silk and lots of other Wallaby and other great organic brands. And then when we set out to do that, the government allowed us. It was a kind of a strange moment under the Trump administration, where they allowed Bayer to buy Monsanto. In other words, two $65 billion biotech companies to merge, but they would not let us combine Horizon and Stonyfield into a, $1 billion organic entity. It was obviously absolutely hypocritical and, highly political event. So we had to resell Stonyfield again to a company called Lactalis, which is actually a huge private company, which is actually the largest dairy company in the world, and if not the largest, then second largest organic dairy operator in the world. And I continue to be an advisor and mentor. I educate bloggers and influencers and work a lot with farmers. These days, probably my main work is trying to help our family farmers, who I mentioned is really my main focus, to diversify, because it's now a plant-based era, and I sit on the boards of many organic or soon-to-be organic plant-based companies. And for example, I'm on the board of an oat yogurt company, which is really exciting, called Halsa. And we're using some of the Stonyfield farms to also produce oats while they're also producing dairy. I think it's just really important for farmers to be always, ahead of the trends. The other main thing that we do is the Wolf's Neck Center for the Environment. We have a really exciting project that Britt Lundgren at Stonyfield leads to put teeth behind this notion of regenerative organic. Essentially, it's an open source networking and information sharing and data gathering effort to look at best practices for soil carbon sequestration. And so I try, I help raise money and help advocate for that. And then probably my main organic activity above all that is working as closely as allowed with the White House, with Secretary of Agriculture, with USDA, with senators and congresspeople, to keep leading and reminding people of the policymakers of the critical role that organic must play in the 21st century. I've always referred to organic as win-win-win-win-win. Agriculture and economics, the animal kingdom wins, soil kingdom wins, people, family farmers win, consumers win. It's preventative health care, it's soil carbon sequestration, et cetera, et cetera. But unless we have people down there saying those things, you can rest assured that the chemical sort of 20th century infrastructure, they understand about that government is we don't have elections, we have sales, and they understand the power of their money and their lobbying. And if we're not there, then they are. So we have formed an entity called Organic Voices, which I chair, which is about 1,500 organic companies who have worked together to get aligned around messaging. something we'll probably talk about in a moment. If there's any challenges, problems that I think we on the organic side need to focus on, it's our divisiveness. I mean, there's a line, from where our passion and our dedication to the principles of organic cross into being a circular firing squad, where we're attacking ourselves when in fact we really have a common adversary, which is the toxifiers, the strippers of biodiversity, the destroyers of family farms. And we have to keep the big picture in mind. And so our Organic Voices, our role is to, instead of overwhelming the average consumer, ultimately the answer to the money that comes in, that's in Washington from the chemical side, is actual citizens' voices, right? As consumers, as activists, as voters. And the problem is, if you ask the average non-NOFA member consumer what they think about organic, they will tell you they're confused. They don't know the difference between organic and non-GMO, natural, fair trade. And now we have this crazy word regenerative, which doesn't have any standard to it. It can be whatever you want. And consumers are justifiably confused. And to me, my success in Stonyfield was not just saving family farms and giving them a means of support, but also simplifying organic to average consumers. And what Voices is all about is boiling down all of our many passionate, important messages, which, NOFA is, awash with, right? All the critical messages, I've shared a few, but boiling it down to one the one thing we know from extensive research with millions of consumers is the most powerful catalyst for people to get on the organic bandwagon. And that is avoidance of chemicals. And our simple messaging campaign is that because over 700 chemicals are prohibited, when you see the USDA seal, you can skip the chemicals by choosing organic. And so we work on social media, we work on advertising, we work on advocacy, we work on influencers, all around skip the chemicals, choose organic. And that's probably my highest priority and most consuming activity these days. One other major organic activity for me is that I'm starting an organic entrepreneurship center in New Zealand. My wife and I bought a 200-acre farm. New Zealand is one of these countries that has the reputation of green, but it's not entirely earned. And in fact, it is earned in some regards. They're GMOs are prohibited in New Zealand, but the forces, the power of multinationals is really focused on trying to break those barriers down in New Zealand. And so I'm trying to do there what we did here, which is put a stake in the ground and build a place where I'm working with Maori organizations and students, with entrepreneurs. I run an entrepreneurship institute there every year to try to demonstrate to Kiwi policymakers, including their Minister of Agriculture and their Prime Minister, the power that organic has to drive that economy as an export economy, as still an agricultural economy. So when I'm not here doing all this mischief with politics and messaging and boards and funding and so forth, I'm down there building this farm center. Well, it's taken for granted now because your generation knows what organic means, right? I can ask you or most NOFA members, and you can spout it out in about a sentence or two. In those days, we didn't have agreement. We had inspiration, we had ideas, but this whole idea of 100%, 95%, 70%, these are not accidental benchmarks. These were hard won, hard debated, passionately fought standards. The animal welfare standards that we're working on right now, the organic livestock effort, which I'm deeply involved with to prevent the loophole for porches. I'm literally talking to Tom Vilsack many times a week about this right this second, as the folks at OTA will tell you. If there's one thing that NOFA has stood for and needs to be honored for. It's that we did the hard work of debating standards. And, you know, does that mean that we're ever done? No, standards are imperfect. You know, I understand what the Real Organic Project is trying to do these days. I don't agree with a lot of what they're advocating. I think some of the black and whiteness of the debate misses the nuance, the gray that we had to slog ourselves through, and that we will always have to slog ourselves through, because, you know, the organic mindset represents a total transition from 20th century thinking, right? I mean, at the most fundamental roots, the 20th century was built on the idea that the earth is our subsidiary, that there's a mythological place called away where we could send our waste, that there's, you know, the earth is there for the taking. But so when you have a different set of principles that show that acknowledge that we are a part of Earth, we are a part of that, we are actually the subsidiary of the earth, that all human endeavor and commerce has been made possible by a bountiful earth, and you're trying to change the exact opposite mindset, you've got to accept that there's gray along the way, and you've got to have the long view. And some of the kind of didactic, you know, we're not compromising, is just not productive. And so in the early days of NOFA, you know, we brought the same passion that's there today. We brought the same vigilance and zeal. We did the hard work in establishing science, you know, at Sam Smith's farm and Caretaker Farm in Williamstown, Mass, and Chaitanya York and the group up at MOFCA and New Alchemy. I mean, we did the hard work to prove, you know, soil carbon content is greater with organic, how to control white flies in greenhouses, all that important work to be able to say, look, this is why this standard does or doesn't make sense. But none of us ever thought that work was ever going to be done. And it was not easy, because there was often emotion and passion that would sometimes come into conflict with facts. But that was the hard work. You know, the positive side was the village, right? You know, I mean, my favorite moments were sitting at a NOFA conference with, you know, Grace or Enid or just, you know, people who I only got to see once a year because we were all so busy, and just checking in and remembering that it's the whole picture, that this was about, you know, a kind of a meditative, you know, preventative health care, a kind of a yoga, you know, there was a whole sort of human health element, not just a policy element, and just restoring ourselves. But the hard work was defining standards and then bringing our definitions, finding a compromise with the status quo. And as I said before, that work continues. That work will be here if I'm around, you know, 100 years from now doing an interview like this. This will still be going on, because the organized status quo forces around fossil fuels, pesticides, chemical infrastructure, they have money, and they have a dogma and a self-fulfilling, self-perpetuating way of, you know, funding research that tends to support their points of view. They're not going away. I've learned in business, they're not going to surrender. So what we at NOFA and in the organic movement must do is settle in for the long haul, bring our passions, but also bring our willingness to find places where we will and can compromise in order to make the kind of incremental change that happens not in giant sweeping gestures, but one step at a time. That was the work we did then. That's what has to happen now. Yeah, I would say the biggest was getting the Organic Food Production Act passed. You know, 1990, big year. Then, of course, it took, you know, a dozen years to get the rules done. But I think getting the first act passed was monumental. NOFA gets a huge amount of credit, but so do other organizations. I've mentioned Oregon Tilth and others. But I would say establishing what now is the OTA was really critical. I know that there's a lot of activists out there who don't trust the OTA, who don't, who think that there's such a thing as big organic. There is no such thing as big organic. I'm looking in the lens saying this to you so that others will hear this. I don't care what you're thinking, you may have a 5-cow or 5-acre farm, and you may look at a Stonyfield or a Horizon and say, oh, it's big organic. We are rounding errors compared to the status quo that we're fighting against. So it's a question of perspective, but definitely not a question of absolute scale. We still have only 1.7% of the national USDA research budget, okay? So there's nothing big happening in organic yet. Now, am I proud that we're 60 billion in sales? Yes, I'm proud. Am I proud that right now in 2021, coming out of COVID, organic is the fastest growing part of every sector out there, from aquaculture to beer to dairy and obviously plant-based. Yes, but this idea that we that we are we need to keep ourselves small or challenge, target other organic advocates just because they're in business or research or in a different aspect of the game. I would say that the biggest accomplishment that for NOFA is that we managed to keep the tribe generally together. There's a lot of passion, there's a lot of different thrusts, but it does take a village and it takes all comers. And we need, Organic Valley is now $1.4 billion entity. I think 1.3, 1.4. It's still farmer owned. Yeah, sure. There's a few more zeros attached to it than there was when we started with Harriet and the very first, and George, and the very, very first Organic Valley Farm back with Peter and Bunny Flint in Vermont. But we're still a whole lot of zeros short of the status quo out there. So our biggest accomplishment, I think, has been keeping the tribe generally focused, building these institutions like the OTA. And our biggest challenge remains staying together and recognizing that standards are a continuous improvement process, not the work is never done. The fundamental contradiction that NOFA has always faced is that deeply embedded in our DNA is the honoring of local, the honoring of bioregionalism, the honoring of our, if you will, our separateness because of our local focus. But at the same time, the need to build both political and economic stability by doing it together. So that's a deep contradiction, but it actually isn't, because in the end, it's about mindset. And the reason I keep trying to emphasize this challenge of not being divisive, of avoiding the circular firing squad, is that, we can be passionate and strongly advocating a point of view, but in the end, we have to realize in the giant picture outside of our NOFA bubble or our Stonyfield bubble or our organic sector bubble, we are still a tiny little dust ball in human evolution, and we are on the right side of evolution. I mean, I just became a grandfather 2 weeks ago, and my grandbaby will probably never even drive an internal combustion engine car, right? She'll probably, I hope, never know what it was to put DDT on your crops, or to inject hormones or antibiotics in a cow, or to not have hens running free. I hope that's where we have to get that way, or we're not going to, survive as a species. But what we have to do here is be careful to not make the perfect the enemy of the good, to recognize that in the changing of mindset, in this evolutionary, expediting evolution, which is really what this is about, we can't make enemies of ourselves. We have to honor our commonalities, acknowledge, different points of view, do the research to validate our claims. But for gosh sakes, I have zero problems with the Real Organic Project in terms of its aspirations. I have big problems with the divisiveness and the attempts to attack or ridicule others who are coming into this from a different point of view. And there have been many nonprofits who've made their entire budget around attacking less than perfect organic. That does not help. It's important to be driving standards, driving continuous improvement, but it's critical to keep the real enemy, consumer confusion, profiting from destroying the planet and destroying biodiversity, profiting from warming the planet. It's important to keep those real adversaries in our prime focus. So here's something NOFA can be proud of. So because my wife and I literally met at a NOFA conference, this is a new line of organic, it's an organic alternative to 5-hour energy. And he also has powder version. This is my son, Ethan, who's literally a NOFA product, born on Stonyfield Farm from a fellow NOFA member as a midwife. He knew where he was headed. My son is in, the other son is doing renewable energy work, and my daughter is working in Washington on, climate friendly policies. So those are all products of NOFA. The very, very first couple of NOFA conferences, the way we would wake up in the morning was Samuel would come around with a cowbell, because we were all sleeping on floors and in dormitories. And he would, because he was, of course, used to herding his cows at his little, he was the ag teacher up at High Mowing School in Wilton. And he was a Cornish farmer before that. And he just treated us like his herd. And I just love the clanging of the bell and the waking up that way. I mean, it was annoying as hell, right? Because most of us had gone to sleep at 3 a.m. because, of course, we weren't exhaling in those days. But it was still, we'd all drag ourselves over, because, he had a workshop schedule and the workshops were starting at 8 a.m. and you had to come listen to, Gary Hirshberg talk about organic in China, at 8:15. And that meant you had to have your organic pancakes with your syrup from, Al Jenks Farm, or, it was, anyways, I love that. The other favorite is I used to always show up the evening before the conference began, as would a lot of the sort of founders, for just quiet conversation. One of my very, very favorite moments was sitting with Grace Gershuni, Gus Schumacher, who's now departed, but he was at the time the Commissioner of Ag and Mass, Chaitanya York, who was the founding executive director of MOFGA in Maine, Sam Smith, who I mentioned. And we all sat with our on the grass in a circle at the at the conference. I think it was up in, it was at Johnson State in Vermont, just going around in a circle, just talking about our lives and our challenges. And it was like a therapy session. And, I can't underscore enough to you how important the village was. I looked forward to that weekend and those moments for most of the year. I knew we were all isolated doing our work, but having those tender moments of check-in, and we'd talk about politics and policy, but we'd just talk about our lives. That was really precious. I'd say the most important, to the chagrin perhaps of a lot of the folks who don't support the OTA, was the ultimate creation of a a voice for organic in DC? Well, you know, in the end, all politics is local. And I do believe that we need to be a more political voice in New Hampshire. When you look at some of the recent legislation having nothing to do with agriculture, having to do with social and environmental policy, you realize that the gestalt of what NOFA stands for, of what organic stands for, the mindset, the notion of preventative health care, the notion of environmental stewardship, the notion of renewable energy and you know, reversing climate change. We have to be a presence, and it starts in the town halls, and it you know, who we elect to the State House matters. Who we elect to the Executive Council matters. And so I would like to see, you know, and it's important to also say that a lot of the national organic and even statewide organic, I mean, national or statewide environmental groups don't even reference organic, even though it's the solution to so much of what they're working on. So we have to embed ourselves and build a culture that is not inward looking, but is outward looking, that looks at our role in society. We need, policy matters, and we need it. If for no other reason, it leverages, you know, research funding and so forth, but we need regulation. And here in New Hampshire, unfortunately, on any number of environmental counts, we're losing right now the war. This current legislature, this current administration is not going in the right direction. The State Department of Agriculture is iffy on organic and needs to become much more appreciative of the contribution organic can make to our state. So that means we need to, you know, educate and advocate and organize to be more of a political presence. This is going to, this is an answer that sometimes offends people, but the number one most critical thing, and we spend every meeting on this at Brookford, for example, in Canterbury, it's manage your cash flow. I know you expected me to say something like grandiose and philosophic, but you know, you can do a lot of things without profitability. You can do a lot of things without yield. You can do a lot of things with bad weather. You can't do anything if you run out of cash. You're dead. And so I run an entrepreneurship institute. You can look it up. It's the Hirshberg Entrepreneurship Institute. And my very, very first workshop, and this is for businesses, farmers, you know, all farmers are business people, right? A lot of people don't recognize that, but I mean, the farmers recognize it. A lot of others don't. And the first thing is, if you're running out of cash, it's too late to do anything about it. You have to see it coming. And so the very first thing we do is we teach workshops on how to not run out of cash. And you can go online at the Hirshberg Entrepreneurship Institute and see my workshop. I have a very simple spreadsheet that any farmer, whether it's a 3-acre apple organic guy like I have in my quarter mile from here, or a small market garden across the lake over here, you need to learn how to not run out of cash and to see it coming. You can be the best damn farmer on earth. My wife, you know, got her master's in integrated pest management at Cornell. I mean, she's going to forget more about horticulture than I'm ever going to know, but she's dead on arrival if she doesn't properly forecast and manage her cash. So learn some business skills, come to my workshops, save yourself a lot of heartache by learning how to do that. It's quite doable. Most farmers are obviously proven, you know, most successful farmers are excellent multitaskers, right? That's the very definition of farming. But so add managing cash to your list of tasks that you're committed to. Otherwise, you won't have a farm. Well, one thought I have is that, you know, conventional ag is clearly failing our farmers. So, you know, we need to recognize that, we're at this wonderful confluence here in 2021. I mean, COVID was actually very good for organic because, it caused families, particularly shoppers, mostly women, to recognize that the importance of feeding their families good food, to that the best way to weather a pandemic is to stay healthy, and less pesticides, less things that make you sick is in order. So you've got this great confluence of a consumer who, understands the importance of eating clean, simpler label, knowing where the food is grown, having some awareness that less pesticides is good. Honestly, the only real problem that we have in organic is that we tend to be more expensive and people don't understand why. And so here in New Hampshire, banding together to promote organic at farmers markets, banding together to market cooperatively online, banding together to identify and connect different organic categories in supermarkets and small independent grocers. This is an important way of saying to the consumer, we're here, we're everywhere, we're all around you. And to remind New Hampshire consumers that, okay, maybe you can't get everything organic, but start with a couple things, right? Start with produce, start with dairy, start with whatever it is. It is, 40 years in business at Stonyfield taught me that, you build a movement, you build a category, you build a business, one, in my case, spoonful at a time. Nowadays, it's one squeeze or one sip at a time, but that's literally it. You don't sweep in and suddenly take over. But helping consumers connect the dots to see, the organic produce grower over here who's at my local farmers market on Wednesdays, and the organic yogurt in the supermarket are actually all under the same seal, is really important, because in the end, the way that we address that premium disparity is, first of all, by helping consumers understand what really goes on behind it. Why it costs more, why cheap food is not either. It's neither cheap nor food in most cases. But also, secondly, it's building scale, which allows us to have efficiency. When I had 2 organic family dairy farms in New Hampshire supporting us, my transportation cost to and from those 2 farms was ridiculous. But now that I have 40, my transportation cost per pound of milk or per gallon of milk or per cow is not a non-event. So we have to get to scale. But here in New Hampshire, we have a unique matrix of different ways of getting to reaching the consumer, and we need to unify our help people see a unified presence on the part of all organic, from the larger brands to the tiny little mom and pops. And if I could just take a page out of the Organic Voices work, simplify our messaging. I mean, if I have any piece of advice for anybody in organic, it's, we're passionate about everything, right? We're passionate about animal health, farmer pay price, soil carbon, pesticides, chlorpyrifos, this all overwhelms the average consumer, right? Particularly the average consumer coming out of COVID, who may be economically challenged or overwhelmed or exhausted or financially insecure. We don't have to tell them everything. And I can tell you clinically from detailed market research with millions and tens of millions of consumers, that the one thing that is the most catalytic for the consumer is avoidance of pesticides. So let's stick with that one message. Go to Organic Voices, look at what we're doing. Organic means you can skip the chemicals. That is about the level that we need to talk about if we're going to make traction in society. And that means in New Hampshire. I just would like to emphasize again, let's keep the big picture in mind. Let's remember who the real adversaries are out there. Somebody who has a slightly different take from you. I'll mention a controversial topic: hydroponics. I happen to be a supporter of organic hydroponics. I began my career with organic lettuce growing from fish waste in a non-soil environment. I believe in it. But whether you agree with me or not, I'm not your enemy. I have a different point of view, and we can share and we can compare and we can debate. And ultimately we have to choose one way or the other. That's not your real adversary. The real adversary is folks who are trying to profit from doing really bad things. Let's keep that in mind.